The sound they were never meant to hear, they heard it through the snow. A sound not of wind, but of screaming metal, and something human, burning. It echoed through the trees like a secret too old to speak, but the Parker brothers heard it every night. Let me ask you something. What would you do if your survival depended on turning a blind eye to human ash? This isn't just another ghost story. It's what happens when good men are offered a reason to do evil and take it. Kansas, 1899. The coldest winter ever recorded. A storm that didn't just freeze rivers. It froze judgment. It silenced suspicion. But it didn't stop the fire. The Parker brothers were not undertakers. They were opportunists, and where others saw tragedy, they saw inventory. What you're about to hear was meant to rot in a courthouse basement. Water-stained records, never indexed, sealed behind rusted drawers and forgotten files. Until now, over 300 families disappeared that winter, only 47 bodies found. And no one asked too many questions. Because the Parker brothers didn't just offer burials, they offered erasure, at a price. They would come to your homestead after the snow buried your father. After frostbite took your mother's fingers. They'd wrap the bodies in thick canvas, cart off the valuables, load it all into a wagon, and drive back toward that warehouse on the edge of town, a warehouse with no windows, and a chimney that never stopped breathing. What they burned was more than wood, and what they buried wasn't just the dead. This is not a tale of murder. This is a tale of commerce, of human lives converted to fuel.
The smoke beneath civilization
and
spoke as text
mercy.
only. Approx.
You've been lied to
400
about history.
words. You ever notice how the ugliest truths are always
past?
wrapped in the prettiest language?
But what if those very
called it
institutions
relief work.
were built on blood?
Said the Parker brothers were God-fearing
Follow me.
men, helping
Not for
widows and clearing
entertainment,
land for new settlers.
but to awaken.
But every time that
Because
warehouse
the truth of
furnace
the
roared
Parker
to life,
brothers isn't
the sky
just a story.
darkened with something no one
It's a
wanted
door.
to name.
And once it opens,
Ash fell like black
you won't be
snow
able to
across
shut
the
it again.
rooftops of haze. Children were told it was coal dust, but mothers knew better. They wiped it from their windows with shaking hands and never asked where it came from. Here's the part they'll never teach in schools. Kansas wasn't suffering. It was being purged, not by blizzards, by a quiet system designed to cleanse the frontier of its weakest and redistribute what remained. Because what the Parker brothers did wasn't isolated. It was part of a pattern stretching across counties, a pattern of cold winters, missing people, and new landowners arriving with blank titles. There were no official records of what they incinerated, no lists of belongings sold, no names written on burial crosses, only ledgers filled with numbers, property values, timber counts, animal weights, not souls. This was efficiency in its purest, darkest form. Death converted into data. You see, when the storm came, the brothers didn't panic. They prepared. They stocked lime and lye, sharpened their cleavers, oiled their wagons, and they lit that first fire, long before the first family froze. Let that sink in. The winter didn't force them into savagery. It revealed what they already were. Predators with permits. They were praised for managing crisis while they erased generations. No bullets, no nooses, just quiet paperwork and a smoke trail to heaven. How many do you think had to disappear before the neighbors stopped asking? 1, 10, 100? The truth is this. Societies don't collapse from the outside. They rot from within, at the hands of the men trusted most. And if you think this was just about Kansas, you're not ready for what comes next, because every town has a Parker,
and every system has its fire. Look around your own world. What smoke are you breathing in, without realizing what's burning? Blue-eyed merchants of disappearance, they wore Sunday suits, spoke with restraint, carried Bibles in one hand and black ledgers in the other. Thomas and Samuel Parker were not madmen. They were methodical. And that's what makes them more terrifying than any axe-wielding killer, because madness can be understood. But calculation, cold-blooded, ledger-driven annihilation masked as service, that's a different monster. They had a system, a cycle. It began with a letter, a kind one. "We're sorry for your loss," it would read. "We can help." Help meant they'd arrive before dawn, load up the remains, offer a quiet prayer. Then they'd take everything: tools, jewelry, blankets, food. Even children's toys were itemized and sold by the pound. And when they found survivors clinging to life, frostbitten and delirious, they didn't bring doctors. They brought silence. Mercy, they called it. Mercy through disappearance. But here's where it gets darker. Local officials knew. Some participated. A sheriff's signature appears multiple times in the warehouse transfer logs. A local pastor vouched for the moral integrity of the operation and received monthly payments labeled tithes. This wasn't two rogue men. It was a network. You were never meant to know that local power structures, the ones sworn to protect, were often just administrators in a quieter war. A war on the weak, on the poor, on the inconvenient. And isn't that still true? The names change. The paperwork evolves. But the model stays the same. Harvest the desperate. Profit from the vanishing. This is where the story turns, from horror into revelation. Because the Parker brothers were not creators. They were mirrors, reflecting a system older than Kansas itself. An empire has always required two things to grow: land and silence. And in that winter, the Parker brothers bought both. You were and taught this version of history, because history is written by those with warm hands and clean ledgers, not the frostbitten ghosts buried beneath burned prairie grass. But now, you've seen the cracks, and once you see them, the illusion begins to break. Every calm town has a dark engine. Every gentle smile might hide a price list. So ask yourself, who profits when others disappear? Because the Parker brothers didn't invent the system, they just fed it. There's a reason no one asked where the bodies went. It wasn't just fear. It was incentive. You see, every disappeared family meant something was left behind. Land, livestock, timber, silver hidden in floorboards. And once the ground froze too hard to bury the truth, the economy of the forgotten began to rise. The Parker brothers didn't just collect remains, they liquidated legacies, and someone always benefited. The county clerk who misplaced death records, the banker who repossessed land before the spring thaw, the judge who signed expedited ownership transfers with no surviving kin to contest them. This wasn't lawlessness. It was law, reinterpreted. And the law bends easily, when written in pencil and erased by fire. Ask yourself, how does a furnace burn for 92 nights straight, and no one in town demands to see what's inside, because the fire was feeding them? People who'd never get their hands dirty, but quietly bought up land for half price. Opened shops with tools taken from the dead, furnished their parlors with rugs that once warmed a widow's feet. They didn't need to know how the Parker brothers worked. They just needed them to keep working. And in exchange, the brothers were given protection. Not from criminals, but from visibility. They became ghosts with legal names. Privileged executioners,
authorized by silence. This is the real machinery of corruption. Not chaos, but convenience. A clean ledger, an unmarked grave, a handshake in the courthouse corridor. And you think it ended in 1899? Look around. How many missing persons go unsearched for today? Because they don't belong to someone important? How many broken families get labeled unsolvable tragedies when resources vanish? The system didn't die. It adapted. Now it wears suits, runs non-profits, signs development contracts in neighborhoods where rent just mysteriously doubles.
And the Parker brothers aren't in the past. They're in your present, with better branding. That's the true horror, not that it happened, but that it's still happening.
Only now, the smoke is digital, the silence is algorithmic, and the price of asking questions is exile. But you're still here, listening, and that means something's waking up inside you. Stay with me, because in the next chapter, we expose exactly how institutions keep secrets by design and why breaking that design is dangerous. Let me show you something most men never see. Not because it's hidden, but because they were trained not to look. In Hays, Kansas, 1899, the Parker brothers didn't operate in secrecy. Their wagons rolled down Main Street in broad daylight. Their furnace hissed day and night like a living thing. Everyone knew something wasn't right. But no one intervened. Not because they were evil, because they were conditioned. You think propaganda comes through headlines and posters? No. It seeps in quietly, through rituals, through habits, through what a man's taught to call normal. In Hays, that conditioning started early. Obey your elders. Trust the church. Don't ask questions you don't want answers to. And above all, survive winter. So when the Parkers began collecting the dead, people wanted to believe it was mercy, because believing the truth meant confronting a darker one, that they were complicit. And here's the twist most never see. The Parker brothers didn't build the system. They just understood it, better than anyone else. They knew fear shapes obedience. That repetition normalizes horror, and that when everyone's hands are a little bit dirty, no one points fingers. Sound familiar? That same architecture exists now, just upgraded. You scroll past suffering every day, mass layoffs, missing people, quiet wars with clean headlines. You're trained to keep moving, to stay distracted, to feel nothing, not because you're weak, but because you were trained. School taught you facts, not how to question them. Media floods your mind with noise, but no clarity. And institutions reward compliance, not consciousness. This is psychological architecture, control built into your beliefs, into your habits, into your language. They tell you what matters, then punish you for asking why. In Hays, that system was physical. Now it's digital. But the result is the set. Men made passive, men made obedient, men made blind, until the fire is at their door. But here's the thing. If you're still here, still listening, something in you is resisting that architecture, and that means one thing. You're not asleep anymore. In the next section, we go deeper into how sacred institutions were designed to shield monsters, not stop them, and what happens when you finally see past their robes. Every town has a church, but not every church is holy. In Hays, Kansas, 1899, the largest building wasn't the bank, it wasn't the courthouse. It was St. Elias of the Blessed Flame, a stone monument built by the same hands that lit the Parker furnace, donated pews, paid sermons, sanctified lies. You were told the church protects the weak, that its mission is mercy. But what happens when mercy becomes a mask?
The Parker brothers were front-row parishioners, weekly donations, public prayer, and behind closed doors, transactions. See, Reverend Alton Mayfield didn't just bless the dead, he laundered them, signed off on false burial documents, issued grief sermons for families no one could find. He was the voice of mourning, for victims who never existed. Let me make this clear. The church wasn't ignorant. It was involved. Why? Because sanctifying horror makes it untouchable. Wrap atrocity in Scripture, and people kneel before it. This is the deeper design. Evil isn't just tolerated when it wears a collar. It's worshipped. Reverend Mayfield preached about fire and purification. He called suffering God's refinement. He taught the children of Hayes that sometimes the Lord takes entire families to make room for the righteous. And the congregation, broken by the cold, desperate for meaning, believed him. That's the genius of systemic control. It doesn't just silence truth, it replaces it with sacred lies. And before you judge that town, ask yourself, how many lies do you accept? Just because they come from a pulpit, from a uniform, from a seal? Religion, government, academia, these were meant to be guardians. But they became gates. And the key isn't righteousness, it's access, favor, control. The Parker brothers paid their tithe. And in return, they were untouchable. And isn't that still true? Look at the scandals that get buried. The priorities protected. The officials moved quietly to another district. The same architecture. New names. The furnace never went out. It just changed forms. But you're waking up now. And in Section 7 we'll go further, into the moment of transformation, where truth stops being theory and becomes identity. Get ready. Because next, I'll ask you to speak the phrase that breaks obedience, that marks you as someone they can't control anymore. There comes a moment in every descent where the tunnel becomes too narrow to climb back out, where the light above you vanishes, and all that's left is truth, and what it makes of you. If you've come this far, you already feel it. The world doesn't look the same. It shouldn't. Because this isn't just about the Parker brothers anymore. This is about the architecture of forgetting, and your refusal to forget. And that refusal marks you. That's why they bury these stories. Not to protect the dead, but to prevent the living from waking up. You're not supposed to see the threads. Not supposed to connect the smoke from a Kansas furnace to the silence in your own city. Not supposed to notice the comfort you're offered is always bought with someone else's disappearance. But now you do. And that means it's time. Speak the phrase, not just in the comments, but aloud. Twice. To lock it into your spine, to declare that from this moment on, you are no longer blind. Here it is. Ash reveals the architects. Ash reveals the architects. Write it below. Say it twice. Because once you know who benefits from the burning, you can never look at the fire the same again. Let this be your mark, not of rebellion, but of clarity. This phrase isn't poetry. It's a sword. The Parker brothers burned more than bodies. They burned evidence, burned history, burned the inconvenient. And for over a century, the world let them. Now, for the first time in 126 winters, someone, you, is naming the smoke for what it is. Ash reveals the architects. Don't forget it. Because from this point forward, everything we uncover, you'll see differently. The next 6 revelations will not just haunt you, they will arm you. I want to believe they didn't know, that the townsfolk of Hayes were too naive, too broken by the cold, too afraid to speak. But that's a lie we tell ourselves. To keep from seeing who we are. They knew. They smelled the smoke, heard the wagons, watched the Parker brothers grow wealthier with each missing family, and they looked away. Not because they were evil, but because they were comfortable. Comfort breeds complicity. The Parker brothers provided a service, one that made the town cleaner, quieter, easier to manage. The fewer mouths to feed, the fewer hands to help, the fewer questions to answer. The town prospered. Hayes expanded in the spring of 1900. New stores opened. Property flipped. Hard winter, they called it, as if the snow had devoured 300 families on its own. But behind every new foundation was a ghost, and the townspeople walked on their bones without hesitation. This is the truth they never teach. Crowds are not innocent. Crowds are taught to follow, rewarded for obedience, conditioned to fear the outlier. The Parker brothers weren't isolated monsters. They were the hands of a community too well fed to care what it was feeding on. Let that land. Deep. Because we still do this today. Modern systems disappear people digitally. They vanish in prisons, in shelters, in deserts, and the world keeps scrolling. The crowd keeps shopping. Obedience isn't always forced. Sometimes it's simply offered in exchange for comfort. No questions, no guilt, just warmth and forgetfulness. But you're not in the crowd anymore. You're here, outside the illusion. You said the phrase, "You've been marked," and that means something dangerous is happening inside you now. Sovereignty. The ability to stand alone in awareness, even when everyone else chooses the lie. In Section 9, we go deeper into that lie. The machinery of benevolence. The smiling mask of charity that covered the brothers' true function, and how those same smiles still protect darkness in today's world. The Parker brothers didn't hide behind shadows. They hid behind generosity. They donated food to the church pantry, paid for coffins at half cost, offered free removal for families who couldn't bury their own. To the people of Hayes, they were saviors, men of faith, providers of mercy. But mercy is a sharp blade when it's wielded by predators. Because what the Parkers offered wasn't kindness. It was control. Control wrapped in Christian language, sanitized with charity, weaponized through dependence, and the town thanked them for it. Do you see it now? This wasn't just murder. It was marketed benevolence. The Parker warehouse became a symbol of order during chaos, a sanctuary in a time of frost. People praised them, even as the ash of their neighbors coated their rooftops. This is how the world works when the lie is deep enough. Monsters are not feared. They are funded. And this model? It didn't die in 1899. It scaled. Now it wears billion-dollar suits, hosts fundraisers, builds relief centers in the same regions their policies destabilized. You've seen it. You've felt it. The smiling face on the billboard. The sponsored post from the very institution that created the crisis it now claims to solve. That's not aid. It's optics. Reputation laundering, sanctioned manipulation. Because when you brand yourself as the solution, you can hide the fact that you're also the disease. The Parker brothers weren't the origin. They were the template. And today's empires, corporate, religious, political, they studied that template well. They learned that if you feed the hungry and burn the evidence, no one questions where the food came from. So here's the real question. What acts of charity are you praising right now that are actually rituals of control? Who do you trust, because they offer relief while quietly feeding the fire. This descent is no cheat. It's just about seeing the past. It's about recognizing its patterns in the present. Because when help is a mask, you're the one being handled. In Section 10, we reach the vault. The evidence the town tried to erase, and the one object found in the ashes that changed everything. In the spring of 1900, after the last snow melted, 2 boys from Hayes were playing near the abandoned Parker warehouse. The building had been shuttered, the chimney cold, the furnace silent. But the ground around it still stank of iron and bone. The boys found it buried beneath a collapsed woodpile, a scorched metal box, warped by heat, sealed by time. They pried it open. And what they found didn't make sense. Not to them. But to us, it explains everything. Inside were ledgers, but not the usual kind. Not numbers, not inventory. But names, dozens, maybe hundreds, each followed by 3 words written in the same tight script: cleansed, reclaimed, reassigned. And beneath the last name, a line not meant for public eyes: God sorts the soul. We sort the land. T. Parker. There it is, the true gospel of the Parker brothers. Not about salvation, not even about survival. It was about ownership. They didn't see people. They saw assets, bodies as obstacles, ashes as opportunity. And what survived in that metal box was never meant to be read. That's why the records vanished. Why the town accidentally demolished the warehouse 2 weeks later. Why the judge sealed all Parker-related property files in the courthouse basement, where mold and time could eat what fire hadn't. But one ledger survived. One sentence cracked the code. God sorts the soul, we sort the land. Understand this. That wasn't just a justification. It was a blueprint. And every modern system you interact with today, redlining, privatized healthcare, forced displacement, engineered poverty, they still follow it. You want to know who runs the world? Not politicians, not figureheads. The sorters. Those who manage the unseen processes of who stays, who vanishes, and who profits. That burned box was not just a relic, it was a mirror. And now you've looked into it. So the next question is, what are you willing to burn in order to see clearly? In Section 11, we expose the descendants, the families that profited, the names still etched on buildings today, built on a foundation of froze. History doesn't die, it inherits. And in the case of the Parker brothers, their legacy didn't end in ashes. It evolved. In 1903, just 4 years after the Cold Purge, a new company was quietly formed in Wichita under a different name, Elias Consolidated Holdings. Publicly, it was a grain and freight logistics firm. Privately, it began buying land. The same land once cleansed by the Parker operation. Elias was a ghost company. No storefront, no staff photos, no public records beyond a P.O. box. But if you follow the land deeds from Hayes to Wichita, you'll find something impossible to ignore. The signatures. Samuel J. Parker. Later, Thomas E. Parker II. And then, a name that shows up again and again, even today, Alton T. Mayfield. Sound familiar? The Reverend's bloodline. The same Mayfield who later funded 3 Kansas state campaigns, who sits on the board of a foundation bearing his name, one that supports rural economic revitalization. Translation: control the land, control the narrative, control the future. And it's not just Kansas. One of the Parker family's holding companies became an early investor in Midwest infrastructure, rail,
water, warehousing, and eventually, prisons. Today, that lineage holds silent equity in over 13 private correctional institutions across the Midwest. Places where the new disappearances happen, places where people are turned into labor, statistics, inventory. Just like in 1899, different tools, same blueprint. Let this sink in. The same family who once fed a furnace with frostbitten settlers now profits from the incarceration of the poor and the voiceless. History didn't die. It put on a suit, and it's still getting paid. You walk past their names on hospital wings, university libraries, courthouse plaques. You're taught to honor them because the system still wears the names of its founders, Ashbecker.
Am concrete. Silence became legacy. But now you know. And that makes you dangerous. Because in Section 12, we enter the final purge. What the Parkers feared most. What they tried to erase forever. The missing journal, and the final entry that warned what was coming. It was discovered in 1961. A renovation crew tearing down the last Parker property in Russell County found a steel tin, sealed behind the fireplace stone. Inside, a brittle journal stitched in deer hide. The last page was dated February 13th, 1900, 6 weeks after the final disappearance. And it read, "The frost holds the town tighter than ever. But the fire knows. They come to me in sleep now, the small ones. They never scream, they just stare. Their skin still cracked, their breath still white. They ask no questions, only watch. Samuel says I'm seeing ghosts, that it's the guilt, if there is such a thing. But I know better. It is not guilt. It is recognition. The fire has memory. What we burned has not forgotten. Let that settle in your bones." Thomas Parker, the architect of the operation, came to fear what he could no longer erase. The fire gave him power. But in the end, it saw him. He continues, "There is a sound it makes now. The furnace. It groans before we feed it, as if it knows, as if it expects. Last night I stood alone in the warehouse. I thought I saw them, all of them, standing in rows. Still, waiting. We were never sorting land. We were summoning something. And with that, the ink trails off. No signature, no goodbye, only a black smear, like the pen cracked under pressure. Understand what this means. The man at the center of it all, the one who orchestrated mass erasure with ice in his veins, became haunted by the system he created. Because even evil, when left to burn too long, becomes something else. Not industry, not power, but ritual, a force, a pattern, a hunger that outlives its creators. This is what the Parker brothers feared in the end, that the fire they started was never really theirs. In Section 13, we confront the closing revelation. Not about the past, but about you. Because once you've heard this story, you have a choice. Let it fade, or let it forge you. This is where it ends, or where something begins inside you. Because once a man has seen the machinery, he cannot unsee it. He becomes either a servant of the fire or the breaker of the chain. Let this final descent do what it was always meant to do, awaken the sovereign in you. Section 13. The man who walks through fire, spoken text only. Approx. 400 words. Most men will forget this story. They'll hear it. They'll flinch. And then they'll scroll away, back into the silence they were trained to find comfort in. But not you. If you're still here, it's because something cracked open. A thread pulled loose.
And now the entire tapestry of your world doesn't feel as solid anymore. Good. Because the Parker brothers were never the story. They were the symbol of what happens when systems are trusted, when smiles are obeyed, when fire is mistaken for light. The true descent was never into their warehouse. It was into your programming. And now you know. That comfort is a currency, traded for your awareness, that institutions are not guardians, they are mechanisms, that every story you've been told is just one layer above the unspoken truth. But here's the thing they don't want you to realize. Once you've walked this deep into the dark, you come back different. Sharper, heavier, clearer. You become what they fear most. A man who can't be pacified with lies. A man who knows that fire doesn't just consume, it reveals. Let me ask you this, and don't answer quickly. Will you burn for comfort, or rise from ash with sight? You've already said the phrase, ash reveals the architects. Twice, and now you carry it. Let it guide your questions. Let it sharpen your instincts. Let it disrupt your obedience. Because this world doesn't need more men asleep in the glow of someone else's furnace. It needs men who look into the flame and remember what was lost. But there, you've been given forbidden knowledge, and with it, you've crossed a threshold. They cannot own you now, not fully, not anymore. So walk forward. But walk like someone who's seen the fire and chose not to feed it. Because once you know the truth, you become the reckoning.